What if Home Alone 3 wasn't a soft reboot with a new kid, but instead starred Macaulay Culkin returning to continue Kevin McCallister's story as a teenager? Even stranger, what if it starred Macaulay's brother, a young Kieran Culkin, as Fuller McCallister, replacing Kevin as the lead? Well, believe it or not, both of those things nearly happened. Multiple versions of a third entry in the Home Alone franchise were in development at various points throughout the 90s, all with the intention to directly continue the story and characters established in the first two films. However, when Home Alone 3 eventually released in 1997, it was a total reset of the franchise, without the McCallisters, without the Wet Bandits, and most notably, without Macaulay Culkin. To find out where things went wrong and how we ended up with the movie we got, let's dive in and take a look at what could have been Home Alone 3. Before Home Alone became a holiday institution, it began with the simple thought that Breakfast Club director John Hughes had while packing for a vacation. As he was scribbling down a list of things he couldn't forget for the trip, he caught himself thinking, I better not forget my kids. That stray thought quickly spiraled into a more mischievous one. What if I was a 10-year-old kid who had been left to fend for himself at home? What would I do? Hughes quickly scrawled a few pages of notes based on that premise, which soon developed into the screenplay for the first Home Alone. However, this script posed a major challenge. It needed a charming, charismatic, and capable child actor to carry the entire movie. While Hughes and director Chris Columbus would meet with over 200 child actors, including a young John Mulaney, Hughes had already written the script with Macaulay Culkin in mind, who he had already worked with on Uncle Buck. Culkin's performance would become the beating heart of the film and the foundation of the entire franchise. After the film became a runaway success, 20th Century Fox quickly made plans to turn it into a franchise, with the intention of developing multiple sequels. However, Culkin was aging fast, and Kevin McCallister, the wide-eyed troublemaker audiences loved, wouldn't stay a kid for long. As a result, Columbus and Hughes had to move fast. Their strategy was bold. They wanted to follow in the footsteps of the Back to the Future trilogy, filming the second and third entries back to back. This would allow Hughes and Columbus to craft a trilogy with a consistent tone, a shared cast, and a clear narrative arc before Culkin grew out of the role. However, Culkin's star power had risen drastically off the back of the first film. Macaulay's father, Kit Culkin, who had installed himself as Macaulay's manager, suddenly found himself holding the keys to the most profitable young actor in Hollywood, and he understood the kind of power he held. For the original Home Alone, Macaulay earned just over $100,000. When negotiating for the sequel, Kit Culkin leveraged his son's fame to secure $4.5 million plus 5% of the gross, making Macaulay the highest paid child actor ever. But the salary increase was only the beginning. Not content to let Macaulay be solely defined as a lovable, mischievous comedic lead, Kit wanted to prove Macaulay was capable of darker, more dramatic work. He fixated on The Good Son, a bleak psychological thriller about a violent, manipulative child. Kit believed this was the role that would transform Macaulay from a cute box office draw into a serious actor, and he was willing to hold Home Alone 2 hostage to make sure it happened. 3 weeks before cameras were set to roll in Home Alone 2, Kit Culkin issued an ultimatum to Fox: cast Macaulay in the lead role of The Good Son, or he wouldn't return as Kevin McCallister. Fox, unable to miss out on the bankability of Macaulay, saw no choice but to agree. Originally intended to start filming at the same time as Home Alone 2, production of The Good Son was significantly delayed, causing the director to leave the project, as well as several members of the cast and crew. With the budget ballooning, Fox needed to shoot The Good Son immediately after Home Alone 2, in place of Home Alone 3, as Kevin McCallister's final chapter was pushed into limbo. Kit wasn't done meddling, however. With Home Alone 2 in the bag, and production of The Good Son just days away, Kit started looking for career opportunities for his other children. He overruled director Joseph Rubin's choice for Macaulay's on-screen sister, Connie, insisting that the role be recast with his 8-year-old daughter and Macaulay's real-life sister, Quinn Culkin. Not only that, Warner Brothers had signed Macaulay for the lead role in Richie Rich, his first big role post-Home Alone. However, Kit demanded enormous control over the project, including final say on rewrites, as well as making excessive housing demands and salary expectations. Negotiations became so hostile that Warner Brothers temporarily fired Macaulay from the movie entirely, so they could avoid working with his dad. Though Macaulay was later rehired, it was clear Kit was getting out of control and getting in the way of Macaulay's career. The more successful Macaulay became, the more volatile the Culkin household grew, building to Kit's divorce from his wife, which in turn led to bitter disputes over the custody of their children and the massive wealth that Macaulay amassed. Macaulay later said during this period he was caught between two adults treating him like a financial asset, not a son. Chris Columbus, director of Home Alone, lamented that if he were a kid, he'd want his parents to be fighting for custody over him because they loved loved him, not because they wanted a cut of his earnings. Kidd even tried to withdraw his parental consent from Amanda, a film Kieran was set to star in that was preparing to shoot in Montana, as a way to assert his authority in the custody battle with his wife. However, agents at William Morris reportedly told the family in no uncertain terms that if Kidd deliberately sabotaged the deal, no one in Hollywood will want to work with their children again, irrevocably damaging the careers of both sons. To finally escape the conflict, Macaulay made the drastic move to remove both of his parents from his trust fund, causing his father to completely disavow him, saying in 2014 that he doesn't even consider him a son anymore. Throughout the 90s, the studio continued to revisit the idea of Home Alone 3, hoping that they could persuade Macaulay back to the role that made him famous. One proposed version of the film would star Kevin as a teenager and would adopt a slightly more mature tone, while staying true to the themes and heart of the original two films. Kevin would be depicted as wiser and more hardened, reflecting the fact that he was a teenager. However, Macaulay, still scarred by the pressures of childhood fame and the family fallout that it caused, wasn't ready to return to the spotlight. This would be the beginning of a long hiatus for him, as he wouldn't appear in any other films or TV shows for the next decade until 2003's Party Monster. However, Fox and John Hughes still weren't ready to abandon the McCallister family entirely. If Kevin couldn't return, maybe another McCallister could take the torch. Hughes began considering building the sequel around Kevin's Pepsi-chugging cousin Fuller, who was played by Macaulay's real-life brother Kieran. Joe Pesci and Daniel Stern were also approached to return as the villainous Wet Bandits, providing a little more continuity to the previous two films. The proposed story would have mirrored the original film's setup, however this time focusing on Uncle Frank's branch of the McCallister family on a vacation in Hawaii. While Kevin had been left behind to do battle with the Wet Bandits in Winter Wonderlands, Fuller would have had to fend them off in a sun-soaked suburban neighborhood. However, Kieran allegedly refused the role, concerned that he would forever be compared to his brother and didn't want to potentially upstage him either. Pesci and Stern also turned down the opportunity to return, with Pesci in particular saying that he wasn't interested in doing more of the same, especially without Macaulay. So without a compelling lead or a logical through line connecting to the previous films, Hughes had to accept that he wasn't going to be able to continue the franchise by connecting it to the previous films in the way he wanted. So there was only one option, a reboot. The version of Home Alone 3 that was eventually released in '97 was written and produced by Hughes, but lacked the direction of Chris Columbus, or the score of John Williams, both of whom refused to return. The story had no connections to the previous films, with new bad guys, a new family, and a new lead in the form of Alex D. Linz as Alex Pruitt. Audiences weren't impressed either, and critics noted that the film lacked the inventive charm of its predecessors, even getting nominated for a Razzie, although strangely, Roger Ebert preferred it over the original. The film's most noteworthy detail is the casting of a young Scarlett Johansson in one of her first major roles, offering an early glimpse at an actor who would later dominate Hollywood. However, in recent years, Macaulay has seemingly started to warm up to the idea of returning to the character that made him famous. In 2018, Culkin reprised the role for a Google commercial, recreating several iconic scenes from the original films, including a cameo from Joe Pesci. Culkin returned again for another nostalgic commercial in 2025, and even began floating an idea for a full-fledged sequel. In Macaulay's pitch, Kevin is now a stressed, overworked single dad who gets locked out of the house while his young son takes over the trap-setting duties. Instead of fighting burglars, Kevin would be trying to win his way back into his son's life, reframing the story around a strained father-son relationship. Ironic, considering the impact Macaulay's relationship with his father had on the franchise. However, on the idea of any more sequels, director Chris Columbus notes that the first two films exist as this very special moment that can't be recaptured, and it would be a mistake to go back and try and recapture something they did 35 years ago, arguing it should be left alone. And while the Home Alone 3 we got didn't just leave Kevin behind, according to Columbus, it left an entire era of movie magic frozen in time. And unlike most disappointing nostalgia-bait sequels made decades later, maybe that's exactly where it belongs. Thanks for watching, everybody, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more of Hollywood's untold stories and unmade movies.